course, we have a huge audience today because they heard Kayleigh Tick was going to be doing a presentation on some awesome topics that we thoroughly enjoy getting into. And anytime we can steal some of Kayleigh's availability, we can't help but get excited. So thank you, Kayleigh. I think this is Kayleigh's third Exploration Tech, I want to say. But before we dive into that, my name is Jared Heckbart. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing here at Brilliance. I've been with Brilliance for coming up on 6 years, and getting to work with team members like Kayleigh and learn from her and the rest of our super fascinating team keeps me entertained in these ongoing exploration tech sessions we've been doing. I'll end it there and pass it to Lori to introduce herself.
Yeah, thanks. I started Brilliance in 1998. I went to Purdue in computer electrical engineering and ended up through an internship at NASA Johnson Space Center, where I eventually worked as a flight controller for the space shuttle program, which was super fun. I ended up meeting my husband there. He also was a flight controller for the space shuttle program. He eventually went to work for Rockwell Automation, and through that, we ended up relocating to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where he eventually managed Rockwell's largest data warehouse for their distributors. And so when we ended up in Milwaukee in 1998, I was trying to figure out what could be as cool as space, and I decided to start a web development company. The web seemed like a neat place to be. With the work my husband was doing at Rockwell, we found we were kind of uniquely equipped between my technical background and his experience at Rockwell to kind of carve out a niche in B2B e-commerce. And so we've been doing a lot of e-commerce work for manufacturers and distributors, and over time doing some work in the B2C space as well, but really kind of known for our managing complexity that exists with data often and e-commerce. And we've grown. We're now a team of 23. We made the Inc. 5000 list last year. And as a part of our growth, one of the things that I'm really so thrilled about is having Kayleigh join our team. Kayleigh, I think it's coming up on 3 years, maybe. And yeah, in some ways I can't imagine. I mean, I know there was a large part of our business growth without Kayleigh, but I can't really remember it before you. And you've really helped us to be much more strategic about conversations we're having about user experience with customers. And so I'm really excited about the conversation we'll have today. And Kayleigh, I'd love to let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Digital Studio Practice, and I had a really strong interest in web design and front-end development, and I ended up at Brilliance almost 3 years ago. So I'm really passionate about user experience, and I love that we've been able to, really build that part of what we do at Brilliance. And we're definitely gonna get into Baymard, but that's been a really awesome tool for us to use. Yeah, and I don't know, that's me.
Excellent. Well, I'm gonna hit a couple housekeeping items, and then we can jump into why everyone's here. So if you get a minute, if you haven't already, please give Brilliance a follow on LinkedIn. We're constantly working to provide hopefully industry-leading type content for all the topics that are relevant to Brilliance. Also, if you have a question throughout the conversation today, feel free to punch those into the chat box, and we'll do our best to address those throughout the conversation. Why did we select working with Baymard Institute?
Yeah, so, a lot of organizations are really interested in improving user experience of their site, but large-scale usability testing is just a lot to, start out with, and it's not something that every company has the bandwidth to do. So I think Lori actually found Baymard and then sent the link to me, and I looked into it, and I was like, yeah, this looks really awesome. They've invested a lot of time and money into research that clients can leverage to improve their own sites.
Yeah, it's been so great. I know we're going to dig into that today, but really exciting for many companies, to your point, Kayleigh, that maybe aren't ready to make that full investment in building out their own usability testing to leverage this research. And we're all about data. I would love for you to tell us more about Baymard's research methodology.
Yeah, so Baymard has put in over 71,000 hours of UX research. All that research comes down into over 1,200 best practice usability guidelines. And some of their research includes one-on-one qualitative usability testing, in-lab eye tracking studies, large-scale quantitative studies. So they've just done a ton of research and put it all into this tool that you can use to evaluate your own site and compare it against other sites and really figure out, how to make improvements that really count. I'll share my screen. One of the cool things that Baymard does is they've evaluated all of these different websites, some of the really well-known websites in the industry, and you can view, their scores. So this UX performance grid is something that with a premium account, which we have, we can evaluate, any site we want to and get this type of information. And you can drill down into each section and really see where this information is coming from. Each review item corresponds to one of those guidelines that I mentioned earlier. And so with the premium account, it'll actually link to the guideline and an article about it where you can read more in-depth information about what the guideline is, what their recommendation is, and how you can implement that on your site. One of the things that I really love is just being able to see this at a glance, being able to see overall, okay, homepage and category for this site is decent. There's probably room for improvement, but it's not the first place that I would start, looking at for improvement, because there's a lot over here that could use that time and effort even more. So another really cool thing is that they have screenshots. So this is all Granger. You can look at, these are all related to their guidelines. You can see screenshots of specific items and what that guideline is. So it's a really visual way to get an understanding of what is good about a design and what needs work.
Love it.
Yeah.
And I'll be definitely, for those who haven't seen it, we're still in the process of massaging a few things, but we just rebranded the Brilliance website. At first, when Kayleigh was teaching us about Baymard and what she was doing with this, I was like, oh, we need to do this with the Brilliance site. Now I'm terrified to do it with the Brilliance site, even though it's not commerce. But we'll get there one day once we finish up some of the cleaning things we're working on. Diving further into what you just shared, can you give us some examples of the types of recommendations that Baymard might make?
Yeah. So I've been reading through all of these guidelines working towards their UX certification. And so there have been a couple of things that really stood out to me. One of them that I found really interesting was their recommendation that your main navigation shouldn't have a single products or categories menu tab, that you should really be putting all of your product categories, or as many as possible, in that main navigation. And you can see, so these are this is a hint at some of their articles. They show screenshots of different sites and have a description about what they did well or didn't do well. And so we're talking about how they have this products tab in their main menu instead of listing out the main categories. And there's a couple different reasons why they recommend that. One is that for a new user to come to your site and to know nothing about it, seeing your top level categories or most important categories right away gives them a really good idea of what they can expect to find on your site. And then there's also other usability issues, like just having that extra click and the interaction that can be somewhat finicky between two level menu items. And there's definitely ways to improve that part of it, but I found that first point really interesting because there's things that I've learned from Baymard that I could see having thought otherwise beforehand. Having one menu item like products or categories cleans up your menu, right? It makes it less overwhelming, but you're valuing that with the importance of the users being able to see the breadth of your products. And that's what Baymard is really great for. They've done all this testing. They found that users, do well with having that information. And so it's really, really great information to be able to access.
Yeah, and to your point, as an example with the menu specifically, I know there's people that will say the psychology of like choice, and you want to limit options and don't give people so many paths, right? And so to your point, like having research that can back up this is what you should do and why based on their research is really great, because there can be a lot of different advice out there. And also back to some of the things you were showing us earlier, the fact that Baymard helps you to prioritize like which things are going to be the most important for you to work on first, I think is really helpful, because in other ways it could be kind of overwhelming to get all of these recommendations. They have so much research that they've done.
Yeah, definitely. And they do talk about that, the psychology of choice, not presenting too many options. And one thing that they say is, if you really have a lot of categories, maybe you should look at your category structure and, revisit if that is really how many you need to have, or if there's opportunities to, combine things or condense things. So they definitely talk about all of that as well.
Yeah, that's great. And the fact that they have examples and screenshots from other companies gives you, ideas of places to follow. I'm curious, I know you told me two things that you learned about search from Baymard. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that was another thing that really stuck with me. So if a customer is searching for a product on your site, what Baymard has found is that if they can't find that product, they just assume that you don't have it. They don't try to go through another route to find it. And so that could be a really detrimental issue for a company if you have a bad search experience, because a lot of users use search to find what they're looking for instead of going through the menu and category structure.
Yeah.
And that's just a really big loss if you have something that a user wants and they can't find it.
Such a good reminder on the importance of really good search capabilities. How does doing all of this work help to improve e-commerce results?
So yeah, with user experience, it's not necessarily one thing that will lead to site abandonment. And Baymard talks about how, each individual frustration adds up, and some things are going to be more frustrating than others. They actually have weighted different guidelines based on what is like a severe UX issue or just, a snag in the process. But all of that adds up. And so making the experience better overall, the idea is that it'll reduce frustration level of your users and keep them on the site longer. And so it's a big effort. So it's not necessarily just fixing one thing, although that, that can help, but it's looking at everything as a whole.
Examples are great, but examples that people can directly relate to, specifically being Brilliance clients. Can you speak to how our clients are using Baymard's research?
Yeah, one of the nice things about Baymard is that you don't necessarily have to review your entire site all at once, although you absolutely can, but it fits really well into different support plans that our clients have. We'll work on a little bit each month. We'll say, okay, let's focus on this page, this section of Baymard's guidelines, do a review of your site, come up with ideas for improvements, for alternate design, and then work on implementing that so that you can start to see the value of those changes one page at a time or one issue at a time. And then the other thing, here, I'll share my screen, and I kind of touched on this earlier, but I really think that this overview provides a really great roadmap. It gives us a really good idea of where to start work first and what can, wait and be held off for later. And then, so here there's a few different things that it looks like need a lot of attention, and we would discuss with our clients what they'd want to start on first. And sometimes it's also, okay, all these things need attention. What changes can we get out the fastest that'll give us the best benefit? That's definitely a part of it as well.
Yeah, and Kayleigh, one of the things that I really appreciate about the work that you do with this with our clients is that you can help them translate the recommendations that have come back into like what are specific next steps or how do they go about implementing them, which I think is really fabulous, because it's one thing to have to like know how you score or to have that benchmark data, but then to actually translate into a plan moving forward, they can be two different things. So I think it's really great that you work with everyone in that way. And there's also the potential they can do a full audit of their site too, right? Like outside of like we're using it in our success plans, which I think are really beneficial to be able to do work incrementally. We're big believers in the idea of continuous improvement. But if someone wants to do a full site audit, and to your point, to use that to build a roadmap for the future, for future work, that's possible too. So I'm curious, when you're doing this work with our clients, I've heard people say this before, I'm not personally worried about it, but playing devil's advocate, how can we be sure that you're not biased as you're working on it by the fact that you may have worked on the design they have currently?
I think it's a really great point to bring up for discussion. And that is one of the nice things about Baymard, is that all of those guidelines, they are very detailed and specific, and as you're doing the review, they're not asking for opinions at all. The review is all very detailed questions, and they give you, instructions if you need it, or examples of how to find this piece of information out, and then there are like an assortment of multiple choice questions that you answer, and so it really is very detailed, and it doesn't give room for personal preference. You can override the scoring. So if we were to do this and discuss it with a client and, for their business reasons, decide that something isn't as big of a priority to them as it is listed on Baymard, we can override the overall score, but the answers to the questions are all going to be the same. And it's a pretty detailed process to go through to do that evaluation.
And I'd throw it out there. I'd assume, our clients could go ahead, or anyone could go and use this. But to your point, we have a premier access, and then you have someone like yourself who's practiced in this space and can decipher a lot of that information and work with our clients directly because we're familiar with their platforms as well. So I feel like there's like 3 points that I just blurted out, but people can go and use this. But it'd be great if to make it even more powerful, to have someone who understands this space as well as their technology really drives home the power of this tool.
Definitely. I think that it was really built for either companies like us or clients who have their own website that they're trying to make improvements on, to enable them to figure that out themselves and make their website better.
For our B2B clients especially, they're often concerned about the fact that recommendations are far more consumer focused versus the B2B world, and then it ends up not applying to them. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so building off of what I was saying before, I think that's a great example of, something where, okay, we fill out that part of Baymard's review around reviews or recommendations and see what the data comes back as, but possibly adjust that score or just say, okay, this isn't our first priority for this client to worry about right now. There's other things that are more important.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You bring up like product reviews, and I know some of our B2B clients don't feel like product reviews are as applicable to them. And so like knowing that you have the ability to change the weighting and recommendations is great. I think it's also interesting because certainly more and more we see like a convergence around between expectations of business users and consumers, because business users are people and we're using consumer tools as well. So, another way that the recommendations can be applicable to us in the B2B space as well. So, but great at the end of the day that you can tailor it to the specific company.
Today we just piqued the interest of one of our customers on the call today here, and they want to learn more about how their site would score. What would you recommend as a next step?
I'd say get in contact with us. That's something that we're able to do with the premium plan. And we can definitely help you figure out how your site would score with Baymard using that tool.
Excellent. Yeah, I think I'd add in here as well, if you have a support plan, we can figure it out within that. If you don't want to use a support plan and you just want a audit done, we can come up with something for you as well. We're pretty flexible in both areas. Even non-Brilliance customers, there's a few more areas that it makes it a little bit more complex, but it still would probably provide some value to you, and having someone like Kayleigh who's capable of reviewing that information and making it apply to yourselves would still provide a lot of value.
Yeah, I'm definitely of the opinion, and I think this is something Brilliance also believes, is that, always making improvements is a great thing to do. And so even just reviewing, like if you have an idea, I think this area of my site probably needs a lot of work, that's where we can start. Because you're probably right, your clients, your website, so we can definitely work with you to focus on the areas that you want to.
Yeah, we're big believers in being learners, and the fact that, your digital presence is something that constantly, needs attention in order to grow with your customers and serve them better. And I think for many customers in the small and mid-market space, they may not have enough traffic to their site to do like traditional experimentation programs that you might run on a site to be able to figure out what changes are driving the most results. And so this is really a great way to be able to leverage research, and it's still data driven. It's not like you're just guessing at what's important to do. It's really informed by data.
Well, thank you, Kayleigh, for taking time out of your busy schedule to support another Exploration Tech. I hope everyone found this as fascinating as I. Anything either of you like to add before we close today's session?
I would just say, if you're curious, feel free to reach out to us. I think we can give you kind of a little bit of a glimpse of what your results would look like before you would need to spend any money. So we'd be happy to talk more if you've got any questions or are curious to learn more.
Yes, I love to talk about this stuff, so I'm happy to talk more.
There you go. Reach out to us so we can schedule some time for you to connect with Kayleigh. Thank you, everyone, for taking time to join us. Keep your eyes peeled for update on some additional education sessions that we have coming out, Exploration Tech sessions we have coming out. We've got some really interesting topics lined up around accessibility and a few other things. So we should be posting something on that very soon. And if you are interested in seeing any previous Exploration Tech sessions with Kayleigh, you can check out our YouTube channel. We've got all of them listed out there. She covers a variety of topics, including eCommerce themes and some other design related areas. So once again, thank you for joining. Thanks, Kayleigh.